Welcome to the AirCon Vault, recordings of the live streams from Airwiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors: A Sound Effect, Game Audio Learning, Kilohertz, Audio Kinetic, Soundcuts, Tsugi, Boom Library, Sound Warriors, and Airwiggles, the online home for audio people.
This is Remote Control, building a game audio career anywhere. My name's Tony Manfredonia. I'm extremely passionate about being able to make a full-time living doing audio, music, you name it, all of the above, music and audio related things, living where you want to live, or even better, working with people around the world, right? I'm extremely passionate about it. I live in the middle of nowhere, Michigan, and I've been able to do this essentially full-time for the last, well, I've been doing it for a decade, but over the last 3-4 years, it's really become my full-time job in a way. So it's something I'm very passionate about because life is, it's so wonderful, and it's such a big world, and I want us all to experience it and live where we want to live and work with the people we want to work with. So what I'd like to do is let everyone here introduce themselves. Our panel, Ashley, George, Tyler, and Sabrina. I'll be moderating. And Ashley, let's kick it off. Why don't you introduce yourself and let us know what you're about? Oh, Ashley, you're muted.
That was my headphones.
That's okay.
Yep. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Ashley Trammell. I'm from Southern California. I'm doing game audio, and I do a lot of podcast editing. I work in the indie sphere, and I do a lot of freelancing, so it's not a full-time job, but I make do with it.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. Sabrina, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Sabrina Fedele. I am a sound designer based in Denver, Colorado. I am currently working on Airborne Empire, which is from a fully remote team, which is very fitting for this talk. I also run the Game Audio Colorado meetup here because people didn't think that outside of hubs we could gather, and that's just not true. There's plenty of us everywhere.
Amazing. Thank you. George.
Yeah, I'm George Vu, sound designer, sound editor, mostly in the AAA video games and feature films space. And yeah, based around about an hour east of LA. Yeah, recent projects, Dota 2, Horizon Forbidden West. Yeah, big stuff.
Love it. Glad to have you. Tyler.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Tyler. I'm based in Spokane, Washington. So you think Washington, you think Seattle. I'm on the other half of the state. I do only music and in the indie scene, and all freelance as well. A game that just came out was like last year. It was called Above Snakes. That's a recent release. And then working on a game called Blue June, kind of an atmospheric horror thing. So, but all indie games, all freelance.
Right on. Great. Yeah, I do indie games as well. My latest thing was, well, the Minecraft Universal Studios DLC. I did music for that. And I've got a couple other indie games in the work called Saragnar. Charon's Crypt was probably one of the more recent releases. So, but I'm also singer-songwriter. So I also do the more performing artist side of things as well. So I like to bridge those worlds together whenever I can. All right. Amazing. So here's our panel. Let's get going. So I want to kick it off with one question. How has your unique environment influenced the way you create game audio? So can you share like a specific instance where your location played a key role on a project? Anyone jump in?
I can jump in and start. So
Great.
Since I am mostly freelance, I do have a day job, and that day job takes me out into like the forest and the woods where I do a lot of camping out there over weeks at a time. And so being out there, I've been able to do a lot of environmental sound designs, being able to record and do all of that. So being remote has allowed me to change locations, and that influences what I'm working on as far as sound design.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. And just kind of a quick follow-up for you, Ashley. Like, have you ever found that, you know, maybe even part of the day job, maybe even like an experience you have with people at your day job may or may not influence sort of how you approach something with your freelance work. So just for context, like a great example is when I first moved to northern Michigan. I'm like 4 hours north of Detroit. I was working at an iPhone repair store, and I came across someone who was all about music, and she and I were talking about music, and lo and behold, eventually I ended up writing a piece for her, and she had an ensemble. So it was just kind of a random happenstance thing, completely not related to anything I was necessarily trying to do, but it was sort of just by being out in the world where I lived that it led to work, right? So do you have any other thoughts, or maybe anyone else here, maybe in addition to Ashley, who maybe have had experiences like that?
I've definitely had experiences like that. There was a time I was designing, monster sounds, and I opened a gate and it was really creaky. And that ended up being the basis of my monster sounds, completely unrelated. And I just pulled it in.
That's amazing. I love it. That's great. Anyone else?
For me, it's not native to Colorado necessarily, but there's something called a crackling forest grasshopper, which almost sounds like a rattlesnake when it comes out, and they're all over here. And I've used that in creature sounds and ambiences and stuff. So I think being away from a hub can make it more creative because you just have different influences around you.
Right. Yeah. And just actually a follow-up question for you, Sabrina. What would be some advantages? So living outside of a hub, right? I could talk endlessly about this, but I want to hear what you think. Like, what are some advantages you found being in Colorado, being outside of Seattle, Los Angeles, Montreal, all those major hubs?
For sure. The biggest one I would definitely say is the cost of living is definitely lower. So because I'm in Colorado, I can afford a 2-bedroom that has a separate recording space where I can compartmentalize sleep, kitchen, living room, and this. And that's one of the best things. So even though I'm working from home, I can say once I'm out of this office, I'm done for the day. So that's the biggest one. And I'd say the second is that the meetups are smaller and more intimate. So you can sometimes get more deep connections. So a couple of people in the Colorado Game Audio meetup that I run have actually gotten work from developers they've met in there because there's so few, they get to talk a lot. So I love seeing that.
Yeah.
Being part of that group.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree with you about like cost of living and kind of being able to disconnect. I feel very similarly. I live right on one of the Great Lakes, Lake Michigan. So it's like when I'm done in here, I like go outside and it's like, well, here's water. And, so for me, it's just kind of part of my personality where I sort of need that. So Sabrina, I love that you mentioned that. It's so important, so that kind of stuff to consider. It really is really important. So, George, kind of going on to the next question. And as always, before I mention this, as always, if anyone wants to ask anything, there is that thread. Post your question in there. We'll get to it at the end. George, you've worked with a lot of people. You've worked with, like, as you mentioned you like worked on Horizon and all these cool things. And it's like, what would your approach be? Or like, can you describe your approach to sort of building and maintaining those types of partnerships or those types of connections in game audio? Or maybe even if you wanted to share sort of how you got started doing that with people who these companies, these developers, I'm sure are not just located where you are, but rather they're probably all over, So could you kind of go into that a little bit if you can?
Yeah. I mean, just from my personal experience, I haven't been very international. The only country I've been to outside the United States is Japan for vacation. And I guess it would be helpful to talk about how I got started, which was to meet people who are more international than me. I met my first boss at this arcade bar up in Sherman Oaks. We got to talking. He was looking for help. I just said yes. I didn't know what I was getting into. And then he started pulling me into these, audio books being produced in London, and then eventually Guerrilla Games with Horizon Forbidden West. And then I got to talking to the next door neighbor who does something similar, and we've been working together for the past 5-6 years.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, and isn't it funny how it goes? Sometimes you just have to say yes to something, and then it's like that's literally the first snowball, and it just builds from there. It's wild. Amazing. Thanks for that, George. And to kind of go off that a little bit. So Tyler, you've worked on a lot of things, a lot of indies all over the world, I'm sure. So, so for George, it was sort of this connection in person that led to what he's doing now. But Tyler, I know you've worked with a bunch of people. Were any of them just like purely online? Just like you just sort of met them on the internet?
Yeah, I think all of them.
Until
I went to my first GDC, but even that, 99% of them were all online. Yeah, there's no meetups or anything where I am. Yeah.
Okay, me neither. I got nothing up here, just water. So how do you stay connected with them then? Like, how does that work? How did that work for you? Because it sounds similar to my experiences as well. So I want to hear it from you. Like, how do you maintain that? If they're all on the internet, how do you stay connected? How do you do that?
Maintaining and initiating are different, right? To maintain them,
yes.
When I make friends, I have clients, it's just so if we're not working on a project actively, maybe they were a client or a client in the future, I pretty much just peg where they're most active. It might be Discord and be Twitter. Oftentimes it's emails, and I just send an email once every 6 months to a year. Or if they're doing some really cool things, maybe more frequently, hey, I love this thing you're working on, or this is really cool. Hey, just wanted to shoot you a message, hope you're doing well. And just these little moments of human interaction, which the internet can be lacking for.
Yeah.
Especially Discords can get pretty nasty too. People come in to see your game and then they, tear it up. And so it's really just every 6 months. And with a tool with that is I have a CRM, which stands for Client Relationship Manager. And so it sounds a little sterile, but it's just a chart where I know who I need to talk to and when I talked to them last and what we talked about and when I should reach out again. And I can just look and see who should I just reach out to. And it really helps me not let people fall through the cracks, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So so that's maintaining. So I'm sure everyone in the chat's probably wondering, what's the initiation, right? How do you initiate then to get these jobs?
I always get a little nervous talking about it because it always gets misconstrued. It's really just cold outreach. Every gig I've ever gotten was from a cold outreach message. Relationships are how you have a career, but sometimes just getting the job comes from a cold outreach, and that's okay. Right. And then you can turn that into a relationship. So it's honestly, I have a script, and there's parts of it that you personalize, but it's just, I can do it with some speed and write it so it's meaningful. I got it from another composer. I'll give it to literally anybody if they want it, but I would find them Discord or email or Twitter, and I just say, hey, I love your game. This is what it reminds me of. This is who I am. I have an offer in there. I could talk about it some other time. And then from there, we just start talking, and maybe I write something or not. But you reach out and you're professional, and then it's pretty easy just to keep the communication happening and just having a friend from that point on. So cold outreach.
Love it.
Just to double down on that, like on Tyler's point about email, don't underestimate email. Especially with the cold outreach. That's how I developed the relationships at Warner Brothers and Blizzard and Formosa, was just cold emails. And, as a younger person who was less eloquent, I was asking for help on how to make this career work. And, I've happened to find the right people who really stuck their neck out and started mentoring me.
I love it. Yeah. And it's funny. The cold email approach, I have to admit, I have to agree with you, Tyler, is similar to what I do and sort of what I used to do when I had a little bit more time. When I first moved here, just graduated college, I would literally sit, don't tell my old boss, but I would literally sit in my little iPhone repair place, like in the back room, just like going on Take Source forums and just like messaging. Now, granted, I don't recommend the approach that I took where it's like a copy and paste, like the same email for 100 people. Like, don't do that. But yeah, like the customized, I like that approach. Keep it warm, but it's a cold email, but keep it warm, That's good. With this in mind, so we've talked about sort of a bunch of things so far, but can each of you, I really want each of you to talk about this if you can each of you share a success story that highlights the benefits of working remotely and maybe like outside of game audio as well? Because I do a lot of things outside of game audio as well. I play the organ, I teach lessons, I perform, I do all sorts of things outside of video game music. So if each of you could share sort of a success story, better yet, outside of game audio or both, and that'd be awesome. Let's start with Ashley.
I actually don't have a good example for that, but I think that's just because I consider working remotely to be a success in general. So it's not one specific success story, it's everything I do. And I think that's just because the freedom that working remote gives me. I can tweak my schedule if I need to. Say something goes horribly wrong during game testing, I can switch gears and jump to that. Whereas working in like an office setting, you've got people hovering over you. You can't just switch gears necessarily so easily.
Right.
So I consider pretty much everything I do to be more of a success story rather than one specific thing.
Yeah, that's great. And remind me and remind everyone here, like, so do you largely work with a studio who does a lot of games, or are you kind of bouncing between studios?
Right now I'm working largely with one studio. It's called
Great.
Whim Indie. We have a few games that are, one just released on Switch, one is releasing in a couple months.
Nice.
Yeah, and then we have one in the works that I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about due to NDA.
Sure.
But yeah, and I do freelance stuff on outside of game audio. I do a lot of podcast editing, but that's kind of separate.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. And yeah, defining success is its own beast, right? So each of you, I'm sure, will have your own perspectives on that. But I've always found success to be like, are you doing the things, right? Are you creating the stuff? And I've always endorsed, like, if anyone needs a day job, for as long as they need a day job to do the thing, that's fine. That's great. I think that's a beautiful thing, because if you can work with both, why not, right? Like it probably takes some financial load off your shoulders, makes things a little bit more comfortable. So I think that's awesome. So great perspective, Ashley. George, how about you?
Outside of game audio, I do a lot of live action and animated features in the East Asia region with a former classmate from Berkeley. We lost touch after graduating, but afterwards we started talking again about working together remotely, because he had moved to Japan in between, and we've been working together ever since, doing some pretty crazy schedule features, really cool animations. And I would describe our relationship as that of partners. Technically he is my boss, but he's very, very much not about micromanaging. And to a certain degree, we have to trust each other, because we're, I think, 14 hours apart, and he's generally a day ahead. But together we're able to, he writes the music, I do the Foley and sound effects and dialogue edit.
Yeah, no, that's great. And just a quick follow-up, because I always like when people do kind of a bunch of things. I love it. How do you find balancing that, right? So you're doing AAA stuff, and I imagine, like, I mean, if it were me, AAA stuff, I'd be like scared throughout my entire workday of doing something wrong, So how do you balance like AAA stuff and also sort of this side or these films? I mean, that's so cool. It's amazing that you do both, but how do you balance it?
I would point to an experience I had, fortunately and unfortunately. My first voiceover recording session as the engineer was with Patrick Stewart, and I kind of messed that up. But
I love it.
My boss made me clean it up in the dialogue edit, and it ended up fine. But yeah, it's just a matter of exposure to these kinds of experience. You work with Valve for any number of years, like, you're gonna get pretty comfortable with.
Okay. And
definitely okay with yourself with, making mistakes, because when you make a mistake, you can just fix it.
Yeah. Great, George. Thank you. Tyler, how about you? Success stories of any nature, can be whatever you feel called to say.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like just having had paid gigs, right? The massive step that is, And for me, being remote meant I couldn't court gigs that were next door to me. So I turned international and just found who was online. And there's just all these cool games I got to work on because I was forced to look outward. My favorite game I think I've worked on is a game called Above Snakes. I just loved the developers. The game turned out really cool, I think, and I liked the soundtrack. I was proud of the soundtrack, but I would never have had that because they're in the Netherlands. I would never have ever met them in my entire life if I wasn't remote, because I would have spent a lot of time, which is a good time spent, but a lot of time at networking events with people near me. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that really is answering your questions, but
it does.
The fact that I got to do that and the game was successful and it was a step forward for me was pretty cool. Yeah. And I wouldn't have even thought to do that if I wasn't kind of forced to.
Yeah, it's like the peak grass is greener situation, right? Because and I'm sure many of us here have probably felt, well, if only I lived there, if only I was there, if only I did that. But I think it's mostly making the most of where you are, right? And making the most of where you are. What are your circumstances? What can you do, right? In your case, it led to working with some of the coolest people you've ever worked with, right? So I think that's amazing. That's a huge success story. Yeah, big time. Sabrina, how about you?
I've got two branches. We can kind of go off of different success that I think we can talk about maybe techniques later for making remote work. But the first one was that one of my very first gigs, I met someone at a round table at GDC, and for keeping in touch with them, for months, I was able to get a gig with them. So to know, I can actually go in in-person conferences often, meet people and bring that work back was very empowering. And on the other side of things, I was able to get the current gig I have, Airborne Empire, through Twitter. So they found me. I didn't reach out. They lived in Bainbridge Island. You would have thought, okay, they're near Seattle. They can take a ferry, meet any of the sound designers there. But they said, we didn't know any sound designers. So we looked on Twitter and we found you. I was like, okay, you would have thought Seattle would have paid out then. But no, they just found someone remote who was posting consistently instead. So knowing those methods worked was really, really a boost for my confidence in knowing, okay, once these gigs are done, I can get them again like this.
Right. Oh, I love it. You mentioned the word consistency. That's something that I think everyone here, consistently showing up wherever, whether it's the internet or in person, it goes a very long way. It goes an extremely long way. And being yourself too, right? So they saw you, they saw whatever you're doing on the internet, whatever your posts look like, and they resonated with it, and that having that sort of glue between you and the developers, it just tends to stick, right? So you never know who's going to see what you do. So always put your best foot forward. It's awesome. Love it. So speaking of internet things and tools and all of that, whether it's social media or whether it's your digital audio workstation or whatever it is that you do to make your stuff, to make your content, to do your work, what software techniques do you rely on most for delivering the most high quality stuff remotely, right? So for example, Tyler mentioned CRM, right? So we can go into that territory. You can go into the more nitty gritty music or audio stuff, but what are your key components in making sure that what you deliver to people who are remote, that you deliver it well? Not everyone has to answer. Just if anyone has something they're itching to say.
I guess I can start this off.
Sure.
Out of some weird, strange twist of fate, I work with a lot of people, old cats who were in the industry when everyone was still recording to tape. So at least for me personally, with game audio, with film, a lot of collaboration and successful collaboration really comes down to email, Pro Tools, and Dropbox.
I want that on a sign in my studio. Emails, Pro Tools, and Dropbox. I love that. Great. Anyone else?
Pretty much what George said. Email, Pro Tools, Dropbox. My studio is using Google Drive. We do Slack a lot for communications. My favorite thing to use is my Zoom H6 field recorder. I just go out and record everything everywhere. Because you never know what's going to be useful to you. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. Do you ever find, as you mentioned Slack, or like, I know I got a couple developers who use Discord and email and Slack. Like, do you ever find having to check all these different platforms? For a while, I had one person DMing me on Instagram. so I had like 4 simultaneously things. Do you ever find that can be overwhelming, or like, how do you handle all the various platforms you may have to look at?
Oh, that's a good question. So a lot of these tools nowadays have things built in where they communicate with each other. So we also use Hack and Plan. And so if something's changed on Hack and Plan, it gets updated on Slack as a notification to whoever is assigned to that task. And we do a lot of cross posting because we're also on Discord, because we do have some people who just refuse to use Discord. Some people refuse to use Slack. So that kind of makes it difficult to balance the whole team a little bit, but
sure.
So we'll oftentimes see cross posts, like things that are literally just copied and pasted updates, but things that are pretty specific. A lot of the times I end up getting messages from whoever needs what from me directly on the Facebook, because I oftentimes get so overwhelmed that I forget to check Slack or Discord just because of how many notifications are coming through. So yeah, I have not found a good solution to that.
That's okay. It's a lot to juggle. It really is. Tyler, you look like you're, or maybe I'm wrong. Did you want to jump in and say something?
I do have a thought. Wasn't trying to telegraph.
No, that's fine.
I look really needy over here. I find to kind of go another route too. It's so easy for me to think, well, I'll just buy more virtual instruments or another microphone or something. But the things that have had the highest return on investment for me have been business books, business coaching. Because especially if you're freelance, you're really in the game of product delivery, sales, and marketing. Not to sterilize it, but like with relationships overarching that. And so, and then with that, things like spreadsheets. How do you keep a proper spreadsheet well? It doesn't have to be technologically advanced, and I can keep track of my projects. And but that a lot of those things of content and books in that realm probably had the biggest return. As far as techniques, he said software or techniques. I'm leading into
that's fine. Yeah, I'm gonna be coming to you, man. I feel like I'm just I just want to churn out music, and then my spreadsheets suffer a little bit. So,
well, I think
I'm coming to you, Tyler.
I didn't study composition or anything, so even though I love it, I have a lot of insecurities there, or I did. So I could turn to the business side and be like, well, that's how I'm gonna succeed. Obviously, it's a balance, but
yeah.
There's any reasons because I was like, I don't even know how to write music. What is this?
Yeah. Oh man, well, you're killing it. You're doing great. Sabrina, did you have any thoughts on this?
I am more in Tyler's camp of a lot of books are kind of what I've invested in to help, because I'm also self-taught. So that's been an integral part. Using Reaper and any of the NVK tools have also been instrumental in kind of speeding up my workflow and my process. And then outside of that, for new clients, I think Calendly is really helpful. So instead of going back and forth saying, hey, does this time work? No. What about this time? And then you've got 5 inconvenient emails. They can just select a time based on your schedule, sync to your calendar, and then you just go. So whatever makes it easier for the client is the software I want to use. Right.
And even with bigger teams, like I've been, well, for better or for worse, the most of my teams have been very small, right? So it's just literally like 4 or 5 max, where it's just little. But when you got bigger teams and you start going to AA, AAA territory, there's a software out there where like you can just, everybody just kind of votes the best time for them. I forget what it's called.
Doodle.
It's
Doodle
not
polls.
Doodle. Doodle. So that would be another good one for remote, especially international. One of my clients is in China. So it's literally just complete opposite time zones. So it's wild. It's wild, the things we kind of have to work with. And it's largely email, but that's because when I'm awake, they're asleep. And when they're asleep, I'm awake. So it's tough. You can only do what you can do sometimes. Right. So with this in mind, so, balancing all this together, right? From communication to technology to multiple projects at once to just kind of figuring it all out, right? The question of balance is one that my dear wife and I talk about many times, where it's like, how, like, there's just so many nights where it's like, oh, I just got to get that done. But I know I got to spend time with her and with family. And we all know in freelance life that it can be very easy to make your life all work all the time if you don't kind of set boundaries, right? So what sort of challenges, with that in mind, what sort of challenges have you faced in balancing this creative work? Maybe even, you know, for Sabrina, a bit more of the isolation of remote work. And like, how do you overcome sort of the remote work challenges? How do you overcome them? This can be for anyone here, all of us, if we have time.
I can start since this
Sure.
has been a
Yeah,
struggle.
yeah.
So the isolation part has been very big because if you're working remotely, and in my case, I think one of the biggest issues of having creative friends or friends in film and games is if you're remote, they will probably move and leave because they're going to go to a hub. So that isolation from having friends, making friends by being in the industry and then going has been one of the biggest challenges. So what alleviated it for me was making my own game audio meetup here and meeting people that way. So now even tonight, based on people in that group, we have a D&D session later. We're doing an arc and I'm really excited. But I think that's one of the biggest parts. And you might think, oh, that's not related to work. But if you don't have the social relief or that balance, it definitely negatively impacts work.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. And it's true. I'm not going to lie. There are people who will ask me, when are you moving to LA? And I'm like, I'm not. I'm sorry. Like I'm not. I'm going to be living in no man's land, Michigan, probably for the rest of my life, and it's a beautiful thing. So it's like dealing with that. It is a struggle that I have too. A bit like the FOMO, like fear of missing out. If there's a meetup out there or GDC, you know, I'm hoping to get the GDC in 2025, but I sort of pride myself on like I've never been to GDC, but I'm doing this thing, you know. So it's tricky. It's tricky. Does anyone else have any other challenges that they might have run into, or and how you've sort of overcome them?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, Tony, because I get that question all the time too. Yeah, for me, like if I want to see friends in LA, it's a 2 to 4 hour driving commitment minimum. Which, you know, living in California all my life, that's pretty normal. But, you know, for everyone else, that's like kind of insane.
Mm.
So really, the way I see it is like every time I set up a coffee meetup or just hanging out with friends, it's an event, sort of like going to a concert. And, you know, just in my mind, is like I'm just looking for a deeper experience rather than an experience that happens very common. And I've found that has generally been enough for me in terms of, you know, getting out of the studio and actually talking to people. Right.
That's great. And yeah, and something to add to that is I really want to make it clear for everybody here. Like if you want to move to LA and live in LA, like go for it. You know, I think that's the thing. But with all of this is the message that at least I'm hoping I'm giving is that you can make this work wherever, right? So if anyone here wants to move to LA or one of the major hubs, like absolutely go for it, you know? But for those of you who may, or, you know, I mentioned, I saw the state of Oklahoma. It's like, well, maybe if you got a bunch of family, a bunch of friends in Oklahoma, but you don't really want to leave Oklahoma and you're worried about not making it work. It's like, there are some challenges that come with it, but it is possible, right? It is possible. Tyler, Ashley, do you have any other maybe challenges that you've run into where you are or in your experiences?
I have yet to find that good work-life balance because I'm always in sound mode. Even hanging out with friends, if I hear something interesting, I'm just like, what was that? And then, you know, my friends have lost me for the rest of the evening. So I just have not found that balance.
Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough, especially as creatives. You know, if something crosses your mind. I think the lead singer of Coldplay had a story once where Viva La Vida, that made their number one hit of all time, came to them. He came to him in the middle of the night at like 2 a.m. and he was like, "Well, I'm going to go downstairs and work on this thing." And it's like, well, sometimes you need your sleep too, you know. So it's tough. It's tough to find that balance. Tyler, how about you?
Yeah, I think the first thing that was a big change for me, if you know Akash Thakar, he's got so much good material, and he told me, like, working. I'm used to, you have a day job, you work 8 hours at that job. It was like 8 hours of composing or just digging into a dot is actually really, that's a lot of time, right? And that was a wake up call for me. And so I'll block out. I work with a 25-minute timer, and then I take a 5-minute break. And then from there, I work in 2-hour chunks of that, like composing for 2 hours, and then something uncreative for 2 hours, and then maybe a workout right in the middle of the day. And being not feeling guilty because you feel like this is my day job, I should be doing this 24/7, or for 8 hours or 10 hours. That was a big move for me, and they really helped. So more non-creative work actually helped my creative time.
Wow,
that was a huge thing. And I also I've been talking a while, I guess, but I've got 3 little boys. The oldest is 6, and so, like, I'm not going upstairs and playing games and getting cool inspiration from that, because most of the games they should be watching, like I can play Dark Souls in front of them. So I actually just started taking time to middle of the workday. Like, here's 30 minutes. I'm just going to log on Steam and play a game. Not testing a game I'm working on, but just playing a game on my library. And getting that inspiration. These are the things that actually inspired me, these finished, beautiful products. So that's another tip I have. Beautiful. As long as you have the self-discipline, which I don't always, to get off again. But
yeah, no, that's great. I love how regimented or scheduled it is. That's good. I like it. Okay, so to emphasize the main topic of today, because I do want to leave room for questions at the end. So got a couple more thoughts for you here, and then let's open it up to the floor. How has the ability to work with anyone from anywhere in the world, where you live, how has it impacted, maybe if you want to share both positive and negative, that's fine, but really on the positive side of things, how has it impacted you positively in your personal life, your career choices? So just being able to work anywhere, with anyone, anywhere. Any major thoughts? Tyler, it's okay if you want to talk again.
Yeah, I do. I know. Like, trying to hold it in. Well, one, having a family, 3 little kids, married, like, being able to live near my larger family for those children, pretty darn amazing. That's been a huge thing. And then I think there's, when you're working remotely, if I lived in LA and I thought I have to be an assistant to then become a composer somewhere, like, that is the route that some people take, I would maybe work audio jobs that just did not pay enough for my quality of life to be where it should be, because I felt like that was the route. But since I work remotely, that's not an option. And I peppered in day jobs over the course of my career, but those ended up being really enriching and grew me, right? So I have more freedom. I feel like I'm less locked in. I don't know if I'm answering your questions. Now I'm starting to just...
No, this is great. No, this is good. This is great. This is great. I love that. And just to second your point, I mean, for me, my personal life, my experiences, that's why I choose to live in Petoskey, Michigan, right? Because my wife's family, they all live here, so it's like, there's just this little network, and we're very, just a very kind of family oriented lifestyle. So for me, like, that kind of takes priority above, no matter what jobs I get, no matter where I work, no matter what I do. If I do a little tour and do whatever on the country, what is top priority for me is to be able to spend that time with family that's close by, Sunday dinners, all that kind of stuff. So I love how you shared that about your family life being such a core element in your lifestyle. Because it's important. Your personal life is important. I know sometimes when you look on Twitter and you just see people talking about work, that, like, you can be very easy to say, well, my personal life doesn't really matter, but it does. It really does. And it can impact how you create and how creative you are and all that stuff. So you got to do what suits you and your lifestyle. I think, at least in my opinion, I think that's great. Anyone else?
I would bounce. Go ahead, Sabrina.
Okay, I'll be quick. I was just going to say that I think there's a bit less of a psychological burden knowing I'm not in a hub and I'm not getting work. I think if I had that combo, I would be a lot more afraid and have these higher expectations of myself. So I think there's just that nice to have of, oh, I'm doing pretty well for not living in a hub, or so God, I'm in a hub and I don't have anything. What do I do?
Yeah, I can understand that. I can understand that. Great thought. George?
Yeah, just to go towards the more. I think the word I latched onto with Tyler's point was enriching, because I don't know who I'm going to be working with in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Like, nothing's certain. But working remotely, it's kind of this whole world is now open to you of people doing creative things, and Hollywood may have most of the big budgets, but creativity isn't just concentrated in Hollywood. And
yeah,
I mean, in terms of things unexpected, a producer I've worked with for years, we were doing basically no budget stuff. We're working our way towards budget stuff. And he asked me, like, do you want to write a script and direct a movie? And I was like, sure, I'll give it a shot. I didn't see that coming. But,
yeah.
You just don't know what will come from, building these relationships all over the world.
Yeah. Right. It's so true. It's so true. And I just mean, it's like such a blessing and a curse sometimes, like the way of the internet and like all the notifications and all the stuff, and how, it really is important to be able to separate yourself from just looking at your phone all the time. Like, that is an important element. But you're right, George, that because of the world we live in now, you can do you can connect to so many amazing people. If you put yourself out there and you do the thing, right? That's awesome. That's awesome. So Sabrina, I wanted to ask you, because I know, again, just based upon your geographic location and your experience that you shared with me earlier, mm-hmm. what advice would you give to aspiring game audio professionals who are hesitant about working remotely?
Sure. So 2 of my biggest ones are going to be, first, that to compensate for not being in this area, you still need to talk to more, or as many, or if not more people than people in hubs. So this can either be through the cold outreach, like Tyler said, or Tony, or going to in-person conferences and working really hard to meet those people, because the work and the interactions need to come from somewhere, but mm-hmm. you get to decide where that is. It doesn't necessarily have to be at these local meetups. And the second, and this is something that Akash Lakar taught me, I didn't come up with this myself, is to post consistently on social media, especially valuable posts on what you're working on. 1, so that people know you exist, but 2, so that they can build trust by seeing this consistent log of work and knowing, oh, they can do the job, because I can just look at this anytime and figure that out. Mm-hmm. So those are my 2 biggest takeaways, I would say, if you're hesitant about working remotely.
Yeah, I agree with you big time. I have something to kind of go off that, but I want to make sure that someone else in the panel, if there's any other thoughts in the panel before I share my moderator thoughts. Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I guess with setting up these coffee meetings in LA and doing the drive like a maniac, I was doing it with the intention of moving to LA, working in LA, working with those people, and it kind of accidentally ended up being that they just let me do the work from home. So it was this kind of weird thing where, I was reaching out online to set up meetings in person to then work remotely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. No, it's again, it kind of goes off of what Sabrina was saying too, about like just finding ways to connect in general, right? And that's something to go off of what both of you said. It's that, for me personally, has been the number one reason I have found any of my work, is because I have posted on social media consistently for the last decade, on Twitter, Instagram, you name it. Just, here's what I'm working on. Here's what I'm working on. Look at this thing. Obviously not just, hey, check out my music, but just, giving some insights or whatever, but also email connections, just literally nonstop just almost a bit more of the grunt work of just finding things and finding people and finding projects. You may spend more time on the internet if you're outside of a hub, because as Sabrina mentioned, kind of compensating for, you don't have the luxury of meeting a game developer in your nearby 7-Eleven. Like, you just don't. So you have to find other ways to meet and connect with them. So it is hard if you don't enjoy social media. My thought would be to find some way to potentially enjoy it, right? Make it fun for yourself. That'll make it easier. And also too, you never know who might be nearby. Just kind of a short side story before I ask the last couple questions here is, when I moved here, I didn't think there'd be anyone doing what I'm doing in terms of video game music. A lot of just kind of songwriter musicians up here, but in terms of video game music, I thought there'd be no one. Going to leave their name nameless because they probably don't want anyone to know that they're living up here. But there's a guy 30 minutes from me, like 25 minutes from me. He's worked on some big things in the audio teams. And I'm like, he just happens to live up here in Northern Michigan. It's like, what are the odds, So there's also the element of, you just never know who might be around. Another guy about an hour from me used to be like the lead music guy at Disney World. It's like, you just don't know who might be in your neck of the woods. So it's being out and about, finding those connections in person and especially online is definitely, sorry, long thoughts here, but I really just wanted to emphasize that it's like, you just don't know who you're going to run into. It's awesome. It's awesome. Okay. Last thing. And then I want to get to the Q&A here. I guess maybe, let's do this one. How do you see the future of remote work evolving, especially in game audio, right? How do you see it going? Where do you see it going in your opinion? Ashley?
I think remote work is just going to get more and more of a common thing. If you go on LinkedIn and you look at a lot of job listings, a lot of them say hybrid, or some of them will say remote, but then they say you have to move to that location. As remote work and the tools available for remote work get better and better, I think it's going to become more of a normal thing for everybody, especially after 2020 when everybody went remote. It just kind of showed that we can be responsible enough to be remote. So I think even if you're not comfortable with the idea of going fully remote right now, it's definitely something worth exploring for yourself, because it will, I think, become the mainstream instead of the exception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And I kind of hope it goes that way too, right? Like, there is, especially as Tyler mentioned, as you mentioned, it's like, there's such a benefit to being home. It's like, how cool, I get to have lunch with my wife, it's like right out there. It's like, it's amazing. It's a wonderful thing. So I agree with you, Ashley. I hope it continues in the trajectory that it's going. Anyone else?
I think accessibility to the craft will grow. I think things like Spitfire has a bunch of free instruments, for example, and they all sound phenomenal. Like, that would have been awesome 10 years ago, but luckily we have it now. And so access to the craft will grow, which means the filter will be more relational, because more and more people are able to do the work, if that makes sense. So I think remote work, then flexing your muscles and growing in your ability to connect with people and maintain those relationships, will continue to be a powerful thing. And I think it's only going to become more pronounced with remote work going forward.
Right. Yeah. Uh-oh. I'm lagging a little bit. Hold on.
Petoskey internet.
I know, seriously. Am I
You're
back?
in LA,
am I
it wouldn't be happening.
Am I here?
Yes.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah.
You're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm alive. I'm here. All right. Yes, it is Petoskey internet. I will say we have a little bit of wind blowing and something blows up. Okay. So let's, if we can, I really want to get into, if there's plenty of questions. So, and Tyler, I will promote you to reading out the questions. If my internet dies again, Tyler, I'm going to request that you read the questions and continue this conversation. Okay. Just in case. But Kyle Ketchum asks, as a composer early on in their career with a small portfolio, should I be working on soundtracks projects for a reduced cost or even free, or should I set a decent pay rate regardless of how many projects I've scored? Is it common for developers to look for composers for free? I'm going to let any one of you jump in.
I know I'm talking so much, but I'm going to jump in on this. I think free is, people are afraid to do things for free because it devalues their work. I get that. But if they have no trust in you and they don't know what you do, there's no backstory, your work doesn't have value to them anyways. So it's not so much about doing it free. It's about doing it professionally and having the right boundaries so you're respected for the fact that it's free. So I did a lot of free work. I still do on occasion. I have a process for that. I could break into some other time. But free is not necessarily bad. It's being a pushover because you're afraid of a charge, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Pushover is a strong term, but being afraid to charge is different than like, this is better to do for free to build the trust. So I always call things complimentary and not free. Like there's a price to this, but there's a reason we're doing this for free. So I don't think you should be afraid of doing it for free. Just have a good reason for it and be willing to charge when it's time.
Mm-hmm. I love that answer. That sums it up. Well, there's a lot of questions to go through. So if anyone has a short thought on this.
A quick thing, if they come to you wanting free work, that's different, by the way. You offering free to them is fine. But if they just expect free work from you, that's not always right. So I want to caveat there. Sorry, George.
I think many of you will recognize this phrase. It's okay to work for free, but don't work for nothing.
Mm. Yep. Yep. Service share, right? Make music, help me with my website kind of thing. I have a moth flying around my face. The Petoskey moths, they're huge. That's good. I like that. I like that phrase a lot. Any positive experiences with online talent sources like SoundBetter or Fiverr for growing one's freelance audio career? Have any of you used Fiverr or other things like this?
I've only seen really weird posts on those for audio people. That's my only experience.
I got really close to posting myself on Fiverr for podcast editing. It used to be a better place to go, but now the market there is super oversaturated. Mm-hmm. And so it'll be harder for people to find you through Fiverr because a lot of the times they'll be looking for, okay, who's the cheapest and who will do what I want to do. And so Fiverr might be a great way to maybe look at what other people are doing to build your own profile, but I'm not sure it's the best way to go to necessarily build your client base.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be kind of like, what's the lowest hanging fruit for the best quality? Yeah, it may be like $20 for like a 3-minute boss battle. So you may not want to do that, for the time that goes into it. So I agree with you, Ashley. Yeah, it's because there's so many other options now too. You got Instagram. TikTok is exploding with game developers. I've been noticing. I'm on TikTok doing my ridiculous things on TikTok, but it's like, it's amazing. There's developers on there. So there's so many other platforms that you're better off establishing those connections, I think. Don't rule it out completely if you really feel gung-ho, but yeah, good food for thought, Ashley. Thank you. Nick Parton asks, there's a couple questions here. We kind of talked about the isolation. So let's do a second question. I heard lots of talks this week about getting into the AAA space and negotiating your way through the pitfalls of that level of the industry. For those that work in the indie space, how do you find a way into that scene? And what pitfalls do you feel are common? So I think he's asking, how do you find a way into the indie scene? And what are the common pitfalls? Sabrina?
Sure. So for the first indie gigs I got, there was a developer that I met here, and we worked together. We had done game jams together, a couple films together coming from there. So on the indie side, you definitely have to reach out to individual developers. If there's any time you can go to this online or video expo or showcase and start talking to them, that's a great way. Otherwise, that cold outreach that Tyler and Tony mentioned is really important, or just posting consistently, like specifically complimenting their work on social media as well would be a good way to get into the indie space. And the pitfalls are going to be that it's not as organized and your roles are not going to be as clear. So you need to be accountable for your own audio direction or composition and that communication with developers instead of just expecting it from them.
Brilliant answer. Could not have said it better. That's amazing. That's really good. I want that in like written out form. Again, put it on my wall somewhere. That's amazing. Very good. Very good. Daniel asks, what are one red and one green flag when finding a job for remote audio work, be it game, film, music, doesn't matter. So red flag, green flag.
A green flag is somebody who knows exactly what they want and will post exact details. And the red flag for me is the opposite of that. Somebody who says, I need sound design, but I don't really have a plan. Because it sounds like they're not in the stage where they necessarily need you. And that's where you can fall through the cracks and they'll lose your contact. It's unfortunately happened to me before. So if you're going to be talking to somebody, make sure they know exactly what they want before you enter like the stage where you're signing contracts and stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Ashley. Any other just quick red flag, green flag potentials?
Red flag is if they don't want to sign a contract.
Yes.
Yep. Agreed. Which actually is a good segue to his follow-up question. What are the most common contracts actually? Do you work hourly and track that, or you decide on a goal and budget? So I want to preface, whoever answers this, none of us are lawyers, so we can't dive too deep into contracty things. But what kind of common contracts do you see?
Project budget. I would never, ever do anything hourly unless it was like in a AAA studio or I'm a W-2 employee. But as a freelancer, always do a fixed fee, even if it's spread out over time. I would avoid hourly, and especially hourly. I avoid that.
Yeah, I second that. But just to give an alternative perspective, like a contract that I'm currently, it's an indie online. It's called Evercraft Online. Full disclosure, so me with him, because of the scope of an MMORPG. The great team of people, and they're killing it with the indie MMO thing. I know that has its own sort of red flag attached to it, but they're doing a great job. It's really awesome to see. Because of the scope of it, that sometimes it's like, oh, he's not quite sure if he needs a track there, or you just kind of have to feel it out for an MMO to fully understand what you may or may not need. So we do actually have our agreement is more of a sliding scale per track basis, right? So we had this general, okay, we're probably going to be anticipating this. But if we come to that, we need like a 5-second jingle. Okay, well how do you then just lump that into a larger project fee? So that contract is a bit more of a track by track basis. Based upon length, is it going to be a 6-minute ambient loop or is it going to be a 20-second jingle? There's so much variability with MMOs. So that one is it's literally my only contract that I've ever had that's like per track, right? And that may change, right? I may have another one like that soon, but so I think whatever you can do to get flat fees is good. If nothing else is good. Okay. Let's fly through the rest of these. When starting out, Trammell Short asks, when starting out, I find that many people recommend doing sound redesigns, find clips from movies, TV, animation, and games, and create your soundscape. My fear is that when applying for a job, I end up sending my show reel with all these redesigns to the sound designer who worked on those projects. How do we navigate that interaction? I'm just trying to make sure I understand the question. Starting out, I find many people recommend doing sound redesigns. When applying for a job, I end up sending my show reel with all these redesigns to the sound designer who worked on those projects. How do we navigate those interactions? That's an interesting question. I'm not sure I'm 100% clear on it. But go ahead.
A person I know accidentally did that with Bungie. And the only real situation in that is that you have to be as good or better than Bungie for that to be okay. Otherwise, it would actually work against you.
Okay, so actually, just a follow up with this for you, George. He also asks, what else can we do then to develop skills and make content for our show reels?
I mean, redesigns are the standard for practice. They're always going to be good because it's, you don't have to make a movie just to practice. You don't have to make a game just to practice. But, if you're wanting to do more game stuff, Unreal and Unity, they're free to download, free to use. They have demo games that you can play around with, and that can be another outlet for practice.
Okay, great. Thank you, George. That's awesome. I'm going to just if that's okay, I'm just going to keep moving through these because I want to make sure that we get to all the questions. Tyler, you mentioned using the Pomodoro technique, which is the 25-minute timer, 5-minute break. I wonder now if that's accepted by your employer, director, creative process. I can imagine people are like, other people don't need that many breaks to stay on track. So and I guess what he's asking is like, does the people who hire you know that you do this technique, or do they even care? Is it part of your contract? Like, I think that's kind of what he's asking, kind of moving in that territory.
There are software that some people use to hire employees remote, and they install it and then it tracks when they're in the required programs. I've never worked in anything like that, and I wouldn't. But the reality is, if I deliver, it doesn't matter how in the world I get it done. And that's the beauty of fixed prices, by the way, is if you take a really long time to do something and it's a flat fee, you start to feel that hourly wage in your mind go down. But when you're good, or you manage something well and you get it done really fast, you're rewarded. So that works best for me to stay refreshed, to be active. I take an hour to go to the gym in the middle of the day, and I find the work time on either side of that is way, way more potent for me than chugging through. So they don't know, and if I'm delivering, I don't think they care. But beauty of being remote, nobody's in this space most of the time but me. So
agreed. Yeah, it's good. That's good. Okay, so for Tony and Tyler, for indie games, how much game audio implementation using middleware, say, do you guys need to do, if any, on top of composing? Great question. Tyler, I'll let you talk about this first. So how much implementation on top of the writing?
I don't do any. I would like to, though. I try to push developers to swing for Wise or Fmod, but none of them have done it, which makes looping tracks much harder, which was a good skill to learn. But no, I haven't needed to. And if I had a big project that had a lot of implementation, I would probably subcontract that out anyways at this point. But it's a skill to have, and I wish I had a chance to do more of it.
Yeah, I'm with you, Tyler. I would say, for better or for worse, for the last 10 years, I barely had to touch it until literally like the last year. That all the developers, they wanted to program it themselves. Send me the files. We'll program it. We'll put it in there. I'm like, okay, but it is, it's a great skill because, again, for AAA applications and stuff, they're often looking for that, knowing how to use Wise, especially, is I see that all the time on LinkedIn. So it's a great skill to have, but just be ready to not use it, because some developers may be using Game Maker, which has the worst audio engine. And so good luck. I had to suffer through that 5 years ago. It's tough. It's tough with audio for that, but there's no Wise. There's no Fmod. It's just get it in there and hope for the best. But
Game Maker actually has a Fmod now.
Oh, they do?
Yeah, I'm developing.
Oh, no kidding! Oh, hooray!
So,
I need like a bottle of champagne, just like
it does a lot more coding than Wise and Unity integration does, so it is kind of a pain in the butt, but it's getting there.
That's great. Okay, so that's news to me. Well, I'm officially excited now to do one with Game Maker. Good, that's good. Okay, sort of a good kind of a problem, but as freelancers, have any of you manage an overflow of work? Oh, I see. Yeah. So if there's too much coming your way, let's say you have 7 people looking for you to hire you for their projects, and unless you want to bring on 7 projects at once, which maybe some of us do, how do you tell them no? Do you ever decline, that kind of thing?
You can feel free to DM me, Dean, if you ever want to send some my way. But you just subcontract it out. You're just helping somebody else in their career, and they're going to love you for it and be able to manage them. That's what I would do. Or decline a project you don't want. That's obvious, but
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and just to kind of go off of that a little bit, to subcontract is definitely, like, I subcontract all sound design. So I've got a buddy of mine, he's very active on Air Wiggles, Ben Reichstein. Anything that I get, if they want me to do sound design as well, I will be calling his name to be like, hey, sound design, it's your time to shine. It's because I just don't do it, but I also want to help the developers realize that they're in good hands, that, like, I will take care of finding them someone to do the sound if, say, Ben can't do it, well, then I still know more sound. I know Sabrina, I know Ashley, I know George, I know so many sound designers. It's like, depending on the type of project, I may say, hey, yeah, I don't do sound design, but I have people who do, so it's also subcontracting is keep that in the back of your mind, because it's a very viable option. Do companies favor remote workers who live close enough to potentially drive in for meetings now and then, like within 100 miles, over remote workers who are out of state? I feel like this will depend, but does anyone have any experience with this?
I don't think it would make much of a difference if you can have the meeting online versus in person. The only time I could see this being an issue is if you wanted to do live mixing with your team and have a mix supervisor, then that's not an option. But that's the only exception I could think of.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't really run into this. And I mean, my, Japanese partner over in Japan, like, he could easily hire someone in the same country, but he ended up going with me, because we knew each other to a certain degree. And yeah, I don't think it's as important, but again, it depends.
Right.
It's very much company to company, person to person.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Situational. I would guess that as well. Situational. Great. Thanks for that. Does including your setup, Nikhil asks, does including your setup and what you have equipment wise a significant point to add in your cold emails while reaching out, or is showing a willingness to relocate more attractive? Yeah. Who wants to jump in? Go for it. I always have so many thoughts, but I want to let you.
Gear, not really. Like with my current boss, we do a lot of voice production for Valve and Nickelodeon. Pretty much his only question was, how well do you know Pro Tools? And that was basically it in terms of the interview kind of question. But in terms of meeting him, it was more, person to person, what kind of person is he and what kind of person am I?
Yeah, that's great. Anyone else?
I think that kind of depends on what your goal is with the cold email. Like, if your goal is just to make connections, I mean, if you emailed any of us here with what gear you had, we'd probably be happy and geek out with you about what gear. But if you're looking to, like, reach out about possibly getting a job, I think just kind of overwhelming them with information like that can be kind of a turnoff. Because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily the equipment you have, it's what you can do with that equipment. And everybody's going to have different equipment anyway. So, like, my setup's different than George's and Tyler's. So just, it depends on what your goal is with that email.
I agree. Great. Thank you. Last question. Teddy asks, do you find that being part of a smaller community opens up local opportunities outside of game audio, like live performance gigs or live sound, that might help supplement income when starting a remote career?
I would say yes, but it depends on who you are talking to in your community. So if you are going out to those film meetups, broadcast, podcast, game meetups, because it's smaller, they may all know each other and be able to give you gigs, especially if there's, say, a film school nearby or a school with games. So I'll try to direct as many people in my meetup as I can to those gigs, because I don't take those anymore. I'm just in games. So if you're in the right space and networking locally, then you could have a better chance of starting those. But there's definitely a cost to task switching when you're learning all of them. So I would warn you there.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. And just again, because I live in a very small town, I just want to add my 2 cents that like some of my local opportunities right now, I'm working on one literally for a nearby orchestra. I'm doing some orchestration for a nearby orchestra. I've worked with local choirs. I arranged, there was a local high school concert band that wanted a arrangement of one of my video game soundtracks for their high school concert band for their concert. So like it is being in the small community and sort of being one of the few people who do what I do here has opened up lots of local supplemental income opportunities that has greatly helped for like the grocery bills, whatever it is, like my mortgage for the month, those random like, hey, Tony, we're doing this thing with our ensemble. We need you for this. Or, hey, I got a performance for you. Do you want to do 2 hours of music there? That type of stuff, in my experience, it allows me to really disconnect from sort of the bigger dreams, bigger goals that I have and just do something that I enjoy doing, real low key. I don't feel obligated to just like post about it and tweet about it. I can just kind of do this job nearby for people that I know and love here in my community, get a paycheck, and then kind of keep on going. Do I rely on those necessarily? Not really. But when they arise, they're great. It may make the schedule a little tight at times. Like this month for me, it's like, well, I got my soundtracks and I have to do this orchestration. So it's a little tight, but I'm grateful for it because it allows me to feel baked into the community itself, right? Where I'm part of a bigger whole here in a small town rather than just being Tony, the game audio guy. I'm like Tony Manfredonia, who, lives on the country road and we see him in the coffee shop. It allows me to be part of that type of community as well. So for me, it's such a blessing. It's such a blessing. So great question. Great question. All right. We have hit the end of the thread. All amazing questions. I know we've gone a little over time, and I know some folks it looks like they have gone to other things as part of AirCon. So we just want to thank all of you here. First of all, to the panel, Ashley, George, Tyler, Sabrina, thank you so much for taking the time to share all your insights from all your various walks of life. It's been so fruitful. It's been so beneficial. And I really hope, and I'm sure we can all second this, I really hope that what you've heard today and sort of what you've learned today gives you some new perspectives to consider as you continue this career in audio. Maybe you can now question sort of the preconceived notions you may have had. You had to go to a hub or you had to do this. Maybe, hopefully, my hope is that after hearing all this, you can now say, okay, well, wait a minute. Ashley did that, or Tyler did this, or Sabrina did that. That means I can do this too, So that's my goal. That's my mission. And I can, all 5 of us, I hope can share that sentiment, and see you all succeed. So thanks for being here, everybody. Thank you so much.